Hello everyone. In this video I'm going to create a sketch, more like rather than a proper Pixelart piece, of a Christmas tree, and I hope you guys enjoy this. So I'm going to use my special pixel brush for speed. It's a pixelated brush which has pressure sensitivity, and in this case I think maybe the settings of my tablet are wrong, because it doesn't really create that 1 pixel thin line, but it goes from 1 pixel thickness to 4 pixel thickness, and this was created by using a 4x4 image, and then I just shrink that into 1 pixel and scale it up with the pressure. It's something that's been always eluded me, to create a pixel art brush that would draw a single pixel line, but I'll also be able to scale up. So what I'm doing here is just creating the silhouette of a Christmas pine tree. And this is, again, not realistic. The branches should be pointing up. But, you know, this is a more characteristic image of a pine tree for the Christmas setting. Right now I changed this into this old pine green, or which is slightly dark. I will eventually change the image into having it way more saturated. But what I'm doing right now, as you can see, the whole sketching idea is that I'm trying to find the surfaces that I want to be facing towards the light source. And in this case, this is a sort of generic light source. I will add some extra ones for silhouette reading, but for right now, I'm sort of imagining that I'm standing in front of the tree and that the light source is slightly above me. And in that way, I can kind of suggest the planes that are facing me more than the planes that are facing away from me. So we have these two tones, and what you see, these separations are basically the tree branches. Now I'm adding a few highlights, but again, just for really making those bits stand out. I'm not really adding any sort of shading information. I mean, indirectly I am, but I'm more trying to call the viewer's attention to those spots. Here I'm trying out a thing that I sort of thought of, which is if I use a layer on top with a lighten mode instead of the normal mode, or screen and multiply modes. If I use the lighten mode, I can actually use the same colors as the tree and make these small pools of light for when I add some candles. And I think, well, that looks good, but I still need to add an extra dark shade in between those bits. And as you can see, it's actually quite sketch based, or more like a sketch rather than deliberately placing each pixel. But again, this is about a 30-minute piece, and the only way I did it that fast was because I was using, again, my sort of sketchy approach. Still, because I'm going to be adding layers of information, a lot of this detail kind of stands on its own later on as I'm changing it slightly and I'm adding more information. So as you can see, I just changed the saturation a little bit. It bumped it up a little bit more. And now I'm trying to play around with the carving of the dark shape by adding other shades in front of it. So if I have a brighter shade in front of that shade, what I'm suggesting is that there's a plane in front of that. So it's casting a shadow down on the piece of image below it. I also try to get rid of all of the sort of big areas. I know that there's a need for low detail and high detail balance. You can't have a whole image made of high frequency detail. I mean, you can, but it's probably going to be too noisy and too difficult to look at. While if you had very low frequency image, you also don't have that much of an interesting. It's more like a graphic design exercise rather than a piece. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to focus some detail in some areas, but then leave these big black dark shapes free and unbroken. And also they are going to be broken later on by other detail, but not the tree itself. The tree itself will stand on its own. So here you can see me adding those circles, and these circles are basically going to be the glow of each of the candles, how big the glow is. And I'm adding a smaller one inside because I want to do this gradation. And so far I'm only using the colors already on the trees. Now it looks weird the way it is because it's not actually dealing with the light, and it's actually darkening some of the information underneath. And I really don't want to have it look like it's a bubble. right? So it needs to be flat. But I also don't want it to be like a transparent yellow, which some people will do, and because that's going to add an insane amount of colors. And so the trick is to keep the same colors, right? And then you can add, and you can maybe later on make sort of a flat image format, and or just take that image and flat it down to a layer, and then maybe go in there and then change that around. So here you can see the lights are different shade, and now I just bring them all back down to the same brightness. And what that does, it is allows me to actually focus a lot more on the lights. But it also makes the tree so much darker that I need to go in and add a rim light for the silhouette to still read as a Christmas tree. And I'm using here a sort of dulled down purple as my rim light, because I'm still figuring out whether I want this to be a fireplace. I changed my mind and make it a fireplace. So now my light has to be a little more towards the red, and also a little bit brighter towards the bottom of the light shape. So the pixels on the top of the tree are not going to be as bright as the ones at the bottom, because they're further away from what I imagine would be a fireplace on the floor, right? And so there's only the issue, also the issue of the bright red. Even though it's the darkest tone of red, it still looks really bright on top of the green, the dark green. So I have to go around it and sort of fix it a little bit and find a shade that I think will be good for that. So here I'm creating a 50% transition between the two colors, and I'm sort of smoothing out those areas where the red actually stands out a little bit too much. This part of the tree, I think I could have worked a little bit better, to be honest. But because of all the things that are going to be happening as well, I sort of felt like it was already a lot of information that I didn't need to be adding anything else. This is now the time where I look and see, where is the lack of detail, where is the oversimplified shapes, and where can I get rid of those. I'm also taking care of some of these shapes to sort of add another transition, because I really want this to look like a glow, right? But it has to be this sort of additive glow, which doesn't really change the palette of the image, right? I don't want it to be something that will start by insanely increasing the number of colors on my image. And the way I'm doing it now, by having those lights fall off of the tree, right, you see here on the top left, I don't want that to be something that just adds another color. So I make sure that these colors are actually the ones from the tree. So now they're just darker, but there are darker versions of colors that already exist. So they're shades that already are in the image. I do add a little bit more colors here with what I sort of decided would be candles. The problem with candles is that they are very specific in terms of shading, because wax itself is a very specific type of material. It has this sort of translucency to it, which is not really, transparent. It's closer to what you would have, for example, with skin or marble. But even though you don't look at lights really close to your skin, right? Sometimes you'll put your finger over the sort of the lantern, and you'll see your finger turn red. That's because of the blood vessels in your finger. But wax, we see being lit a lot on candles, so we have a pretty good idea of what a candle looks like. And if you don't do that gradient on the candle, it means that the candle is not lit and that the light in the room is on. If the candle is lit, the candle will have a gradient. There's no way around it, unless, of course, you have no colors to use. But in this case, I'll say, I'll just spend a few more colors on this. Here I'm also trying to get rid of some of the overlaying shades that are happening with this second rim color that I added. And this rim color here is meant to represent the color coming from the window, for example. And it's really just to add a detail rim light on the left, so that the silhouette also stands out and reads fairly decently. I will admit this is a fairly simplistic tree. There's no tinsels, no like Christmas balls or stars on top. But yeah, I just wanted this to be like a quick sketch, just to keep it within the Christmas theme, and have a little bit fun of just doing a final piece before the new year. Here I'm managing the layers because I couldn't find what was happening with the what was happening with that layer there, because I was getting a highlight underneath that that candle, and that's because I duplicated the glow from the candle. I moved it down and under the candles so that I would make a glow on the on the leaves or on the branches of the tree. So it's not just a floating glow where the candle light is, but also on the tree itself being lit where the candle sits. And then what I did was I went on and basically erased a little bit of the glow in each of the candles to simulate the shadow of the candle itself. Now, I should have done this. I should have done this in a more elliptical shape, but to be honest, I don't even know how you hang a candle onto a Christmas tree. I know that people used to, and then there was a fire, and then they stopped, which makes sense. And I also know that the tradition of the Christmas tree with candles, I think, was started in Germany in 600 something or 1600 something. I don't know the exact date, but I think it was some sort of like a club that they were celebrating Christmas or something like that. So here I'm doing a Christmas present, and this is just a box. I just extrude this shape up by duplicating and tapping the up button, by pressing Alt and tapping the up button. And I sort of deformed it a little bit and erased it a little bit out of the top there, just because I wanted to give some sort of conical perspective, right? Because right now it's very isometric, and I made it isometric to begin with. And here's my technique for lighting a box. I select the top, bring up the levels, and then I add to that selection. Actually, I'd rather use the other face because it's facing the fireplace, and then I light both of those. And now I have 3 different faces on my cube. It's no longer a weird hexagon, it's now a cube. Also, I'm using the same shades that I have on the image, on the box, to shade the box. So the transition between the 2 sides is the same color as the top. And then I'll find a extra shade to highlight the transition from the top to the bright side, which is picked off of the tree of the sort of off of the bounce light from the fireplace on the tree. I find those colors to be really warm and interesting. So here I'm also adding the rim light from the left, but it takes me a while to realize that it's actually a little bit off. But I do want this present to look metallic. That's why I made the highlights more saturated, rather than just bright white or just desaturated red, because that would make it look a bit more like plastic or like paper. And I do want this to be like one of those shiny wrapping papers. So here I toned down the saturation and the brightness there on the reflections on the left. I do want to keep them because I think it's interesting and it makes it look like they are actually reflections that are showing the sort of the wrapping of the paper, or the warping of the wrapping paper. And so eventually I'll add the same on the right, just to get the same feel off of it. And now I'm adding shadows here for the ribbons, just to give them a thicker look. I know they'll become unrealistic because ribbons are really, really, really thin, but it just adds to the whole adds to the image to have those ribbons, really thick and sort of unrealistic in a way. Also adding the highlight on the bend where the ribbons come from the top and bend down to the sides, because it helps sort of give the continuation of the shape itself, the shading itself. Also adding highlights there to the sort of ribbon bows and a little bit of drop shadow. As I'm doing this drop shadow, again, to sit the bows on the box, I remember that to help sit this whole thing on the ground, I could add a ground. So I just add this ellipse, non-anti-aliased ellipse, and I carve out the shadow from the box, and I also carve out a shadow shape from what potentially would be the shadow of the tree. I realize that the box is a little too pointy at the bottom, so I carved that away. There's a few cleanups there of some layers that when you're using too many layers, eventually you're going to start painting on the wrong one, and that's just not right. So here's the final image. I hope you guys enjoyed it and learned something. And if I'm still on time, I hope you guys have an awesome holiday season, and I hope to see you around. Take care, and see you soon.